guys, it's Robin, RsIslandCrafts, and welcome to my craft room. This week we're going to be working on another video request that's been requested by one of my followers and commenters. A few weeks ago I showed you how to put snaps into a project bag instead of zippers. But I had a request to actually show how to make the bag, because all I did was I made the bag and I showed you the zippers. So one of the followers wanted to know how to actually make the bag. I need another project bag for knitting socks for my son, so I thought I'd go ahead and show you how I make the bag. Now this bag is about 8 inches tall and 9.5 inches wide. But when I knit socks for Robbie and for myself, I like to knit both socks concurrently, so on two separate needles but at the same time. And I want something that's just a little bit bigger than this, maybe a little bit wider, to hold all the balls of sock and the actual socks that I'm knitting out a little better. So while this is a great one for just knitting a shawl or a hat or socks one at a time, it's not quite big enough for my needs. So the next one I make is going to be a little bit larger. I'm going to go ahead and give you the measurements that I'm using for this bag, but in reality, it's your bag. You can make it any size you want. Maybe start out with some scrap fabrics and test out the size and how the pattern works before you start working with your favorite fabrics. So here's the numbers that I'm going to be using for my new bag. The contrast bottom in this one is the purple flower fabric, and it goes all the way across the bottom. And when you're done, it goes a little bit up the side so that you can see the little contrast. And the main top would be my flower fabric. Now the lining, I don't have a number down because I'm going to show you how I make my linings. But basically, we're going to stitch these two together. And then we're going to measure it and then cut our lining. Now this bag doesn't have a handle on it, but I like to take my socks when I go out to doctor's appointments or I sit at the pharmacy waiting on prescriptions. So I'm going to be adding a handle to my bag, and I'll show you how I do that. Once again, you can use any size bag you want. Your proportions can be however you want. You can have a wider bag, or you can have a taller bag, or you can just stick with the basics that I have. Now the fabrics I chose, I have this beautiful turtle fabric that I've been hoarding and saving for a while to make something for myself. It's more of a canvasy type fabric, so this is a lot sturdier than your basic regular cotton fabric, your quilting cotton. I did choose a black fabric. This is just your basic quilting cotton for the bottom. This one's nice and sturdy, so I probably won't have to worry about it, but I will be adding some fusible interfacing to the bottom of my bag just to add some strength. Plus the bottom of the bag will be a weak spot because that's what's sitting down on the counter and on the couch and never on the floor for me. But it does touch a lot of surfaces, so you want this part to be a little stronger. And because it's my bag and I don't think that the inside of the bag, the lining necessarily has to match the outside, I decided to bring in this fun fabric. I have turtles on the outside, so I wanted some turtles on the inside. The Ninja Turtles were always a really big thing in my family. The kids love to watch it. Hubby likes to watch it on TV. I kind of liked it. We watched the cartoons and the movies. So I'm going to be using this lining with that. And then I used the outside turtle fabric for my handle. Once again, this handle is made more of a sturdier fabric, so I'm not going to put any batting in this or any interfacing. This is going to be sturdy enough as it is. So the first thing I did is I cut out 2 of each pieces because you want to have 2 sides to your bag, so I have a top and a bottom. Now the interfacing I'm using is, this is the P44F fusible interfacing from LaLone. This is more of it's a lightweight interfacing. It's not super stiff and sturdy. I don't need the bottom of my bag to be too sturdy. And instead of this, I could also use some batting if I chose. So I'm going to cut out 2 pieces of this that match the black bottom of my bag, the contrast fabric, and I'm going to go ahead and iron that on. Both pieces have their fusible interfacing all fused on. Now if you want to make this quick and simple and easy and you don't want to use like straight up batting to quilt your little bag, you can go ahead and get some fusible fleece, and that'll add a little bit of structure to your bag, but it'll still be kind of soft like quilt batting is. Or if you have a sturdy enough outdoor type fabric, or if you're using denim or something along those lines, you can just go ahead and skip any type of interfacing or batting if you choose to. And if you don't need a bag that actually sits up on its own and has great structure, then you can go ahead and just skip any type of linings and interfacing and such like that, and just go with your 2 pieces of cotton fabric, your lining, and your inside. But since I'm using this canvas top, like I said, I just went ahead and add a little extra structure to the bottom and interface that with some lightweight. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my top and sew it to my bottom simply by flipping them together and stitching it together with about a 1/4 inch seam. Now the one thing you want to be careful for is make sure you have it so that your bag is orientated properly. And for me, that's going to mean that my bag is wider than it is tall. Now I have made some mistakes in the past, and I've accidentally, if you're using something that's maybe 10 by 9 inches, I have orientated it the wrong way. So I just make sure I have these all set up like that. I'm going to sew the first one, and then I'm also going to sew the front and the back. Just make sure you decide, like this fabric, I get to choose. It doesn't have a direction to it, so I can choose which way I want my turtles going. Now in this cut of fabric, we can see that most of the turtles are going this way. But with this piece of fabric, I have a turtle going this way and that way, so I can decide which part I just feel like is the top and the bottom. So I'm going to take these over to my sewing machine and stitch it. At this point, we have the front and the back complete. This is your contrast bottom and your top. And what I did is I prefer to go ahead and press it to the top of my bag, to my main fabric. With this, especially with this heavier fabric, it always wants to go down to the contrast on the bottom, but I like to put it up to the top because I like to add, see if you could see, I add just a little line. I use black thread because it's a good match with my bag. You could choose a contrast fabric if you thread if you'd like, but I just go ahead and I do just that little 1/8 of an inch top stitch all along here. It'll reinforce this seam, but what it really does is it gives it that little bit extra of a professional look. Top stitching goes a long way to making your project look like you've done a really good professional job. So once again, I've pressed it to the main body of the fabric and 1/8 of an inch all along. Now if you were going to be using the quilt batting, before I did this top stitching, I would go ahead and put this on top of my quilt batting, leave some extra room like you normally do when you're quilting, and do any type of quilt design you would like. Sometimes I simply just put this on top of some quilt batting and do the one top stitch, and then that's enough. The bag is going to be small enough at this size even to stay together. It's not going to be washed that often. Now here's one I made earlier today that I made a little bit of an oops on, and as I said, I held my fabric in the wrong direction, so my contrast fabric is all the way in the bottom, and it's even pulled some of the main fabric down. But since this bag is just for me, it's okay. But what I wanted to show you is sometimes on my bottoms, I like to just do some straight line quilting. When I'm using batting inside, this one has batting. It stands up a little bit on of its own. It's not too stiff. It's still easy to fold up and to throw in a bag and take with you. But this little bit extra on the bottom of the bag, it gives a little extra sturdiness and structure to it. And then the rest of this, as you can see, I did my top stitching along between the contrast and the top, and the rest of it there's no quilting on it whatsoever. And that's going to hold the bag together fine. It doesn't need a lot of quilting, but if you want, you can go ahead and add some quilting to it if you're using the batting. Now that we have our bag to this point, we can go ahead and now cut out our lining fabrics. Give it a good press if it needs it. And then all I'll do is I will lay the outside of my bag right on top of it like this. Take my ruler and my rotary cutter, and then I will just cut around both pieces. Because both pieces are the same size, you can fold this right side together and cut two at the same time, or just cut them one at a time. It's up to you. At this point, I have my two lining pieces that match the same as my two outer pieces. And I also have my handle. Now my handle is cut 4 inches wide by 12 inches long. It's kind of a personal thing, whichever you need it for and however long you like it. I take a tape measure and I kind of pinch it at the 12-inch mark if that's the length I'm looking for. And then I fold it, and I just decide, okay, is that going to fit my hand comfortably? Do I need to have it 10 inches? Do I need to have it 14 inches? You make the handle as long as you want, or don't put a handle on it at all. I press it out. I iron it in half. And then I iron the two sides into the center. Basically with this bag, it's really almost 100% similar to making a tote bag. So if you've ever made a tote bag, then you already know how to make this bag. You might just need to know how to put the snaps. In this video, I won't be showing you how to do the snaps. You can check out here in the iCard where I've already made it with the purple flower bag. This video is going to be strictly about making the bag itself. And then I fold the strap back over again. And it ends up to be about 1 inch wide. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and stitch down 1/8 of an inch on each end to top stitch it. As I said, since my fabric is more of a canvas fabric, it is going to be sturdy enough for my handle. Some bag makers do not put anything in their handle. They don't put any batting or any stabilizer. They just let it be as a straight cotton. You're not going to be putting books inside of it. It's not, like I said, like it's similar making of a tote bag, but you're not going to usually be carrying anything more than a few skeins of yarn. So it's not going to be really pounds and pounds of weight. So if you want to, you can just have a straight fabric. For this handle, I went ahead and I put a piece of batting in there. For my handle, since it's going to be 1 inch wide after it's all done, I went ahead and I cut out a piece of batting that's 3/4 of an inch by however long I cut my strap. And then I opened it up and I just stuck it right here in one of the sections that are down at the bottom of the handle. So that when I refolded it, it would be in this section here. And then I just top stitched both sides. Now I'm going to go ahead and go over and top stitch this so you can see what it looks like. And there you go. There's my handle. Now you can be really picky and choosy on what part of your fabric you cut so that when you fold it you have an actual design. If you maybe have if I had little turtles, I might be able to set it up so all my turtles are right here where I could see it. But based with my fabric, it wasn't going to work. Now you could also choose to put your lining fabric as your handle. So it's kind of like a nod to what's inside the bag. But since I'm going totally off board and going crazy and using the green turtles, I don't think that would really make a nice handle on the outside of this bag. It would look really strange. And while I might want strange on the inside of my bag, I don't necessarily need it on the outside. So there's my top stitching. I just went down both sides, fed it through my machine, spun it around, and went back through. Now you can press it again if it needs it. Sometimes if you're using just straight quilting cotton, it might get a little wobbly, so you give it a good press. Next up will be marking the corners for a gusset. Now I like to do this type of gusset where you cut out the little corners here ahead of time. You could instead choose the version where you stitch your two pieces together and then afterwards you pull out that little corner and then put it there. I've shown you in videos before different ways. If I could find a video, I'll go ahead and pop it up that in the iCard also, in different ways you can do the gusset in the bottom. But my favorite is going to be just to cut out the little squares. I tend to do a standard 2.5 inch. Not sure if I'll be able to see. Oh, I can see. If you can't see, I have a white chalk pencil and I just have a regular old pen. If you were doing just on straight black fabric, you would probably need to use something, a yellow pencil, or even just a white crayon if you have it, to mark your little squares out. Now you could take your rotary cutter and just lay this down and cut around it, but I always end up with those little extra cuts when I go past the ruler, and I don't like that. Now remember, whatever you cut out here, that's basically going to be double, and that will be your gusset. Now this is 2.5 inches, and of course we're going to have our seam allowance. So I usually figure that a 2.5 inch, if I cut that out, then that's going to give me a 4-inch gusset. That'll give me a nice wide bottom, and it'll give me plenty of room to keep my yarn. So you could play around with this. Sometimes they do 1 3/4 or 1.5. It's totally up to you. But I'm just going to stick with the 2.5. So I put my little 2.5 inch square down, whatever size ruler you have. Even if you have to use one of those school rulers, you can just mark it with that. If you prefer, you could wait until you stitch these pieces together and then just cut it out in, excuse me, in one. So you'd be cutting out through both layers at the same time. But sometimes it's just as easy to cut this way. When I do the lining fabric, I'll go ahead and show you what it looks like if you were to stitch both pieces together first, then cut out the gusset pieces. You see my little purple lines? And I just cut out this square. I have seen people cut out, like one part is 2 inches and one is 1.5 or 1 3/4. But I like to have a nice square bottom, and I like to have it all even, and I just cut it straight. Yes, I save these pieces. Sometimes I leave the interfacing on, and other times it's really not ironed on that well. I just peel it off and I save this. Now, you know this right here is a 2.5 inch square, and I put that in my 2.5 inch square bucket. Even if you're just a bag maker, you can have all these little extra pieces that you can save, and then you can make a patchwork bag out of them. If you have nice sharp scissors that cut all the way to the tip, it makes this a little easier. Otherwise, you have to be careful as you're slipping your scissors in. And this is what it ends up looking like. So what we're going to do is take these two pieces together. And we have to match up our side seams here, because when we're done, we want these to match up nice and neat on the side. So I pin from the bottom diagonally to the top. And then I pin from the top diagonally to the bottom. Sometimes you can put them straight up and down, and you can put a third one in the center where you want, if you want. Sometimes it just seems to hold it nice and steady for me. Come see me with the next bag and I'll probably pin totally different. Now we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch. You want to back stitch at the top and back stitch at the bottom, because we're going to be manipulating this a little bit and we don't want our stitching to come undone. I normally do a little bit of a generous 1/4 inch. A lot of the professional bag makers like to do a 1/2 inch. Totally up to you, but we're going to do it on both sides. And at the same time, I'm also going to take my lining fabric. See how I'm lining it up to make sure I have the orientation properly? because at this point I would not want to stitch it sideways. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start at the top and back stitch, and I'm going to stitch all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to do it on two sides. And then I'm going to stitch across the bottom. And on this one, I'm going to stitch completely across the bottom here. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm a little lost today, but when I'm stitching across the bottom on my lining, I want to go ahead and leave a section open. So I'm going to stitch and leave about a 2 to 3 inch opening, back stitch here, come back here, back stitch, and then stitch all the way to the end. By the way, we forgot to add the handle in. Now I did stitch down one side, but I remembered before I stitched down the second side. You're just going to take your handle and you're going to fold it in half. I don't crease it or anything because I don't want a big kink there. And then you're going to pick a spot on your bag. Now you can go down 2 inches and put it. You can put it down 3. We're not putting in a zipper in this. We're just going to be putting in a snap. So at least for the first inch, you don't want to have your handle. I like to go down about 2 inches. I let it stick out just a little bit past, about a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch past the outside of my bag. Make sure the handle part's on the inside of your sandwich. You could pin it. You can use the little clippies, whichever works for you. Now as I'm stitching down here, I do like to go over this 2 or 3 times just to hold it in and make sure it's nice and structurally, because you will be hanging your project from this handle, and while the handle itself doesn't need to hold a lot of weight, you want to make sure that your seam is nice and sturdy so your handle doesn't pull out. I don't normally put handles in my bags for like when I'm making them for customers in the shop, so it's really easy for me to forget to put the handle in. So there's the handle. I don't know if you can see, but I went ahead and I stitched all the way down. Then I came back and I went over a little bit further and I stitched there, and then I stitched one down the center. So it's got triple stitching. I don't always like to stitch over and over on the same exact line. And this extra little nubby that we got hanging off, we're just going to go ahead and trim that off. Now this one, because it's such a sturdy material and canvas, it was really kind of a little bit harder to go through. It was like sewing through jeans. I just went really slow with my machine. Maybe if you're making something like this, you might fold it in half and make a tube and then turn a tube back inside out. So instead of having 4 layers of fabric, you only have the 2. So I've gone ahead, I've stitched down both sides, back stitching at top and bottom, and then I went ahead and stitched down through here. And then on my lining fabric, the same thing, back tack at the top, stitch all the way down, and then when I came across, I left myself a little opening. The only consideration you have to have here is you want to make sure your opening is at least 2 inches, because we're going to be cutting these squares out. So you want your opening to be decently towards the center. Mine's a little off center, but there's still plenty of stitches in between, so we'll be able to do everything. I'm going to go ahead and mark my gussets. Cut them out. Now this time I'm not going to be able to put my scraps into the 2-inch bin or the 2.5-inch scrap bin because I have the seams in it now. I've stitched those sides. So it's not a full piece anymore. So what I do is I just cut off the stitching, throw these pieces away, and then these 2 pieces can just go into my scrap bin for whatever. Bear with me, we're getting close to the end. So now our next step is to go ahead and work on our gussets. When you cut out the little corners like this, it's real easy. Just kind of open it up and you're going to match your 2 seams. go ahead and nest the seam. There's not a lot of thickness in here, it's just a lining, so I can go ahead and just push one seam over to the one side and one to the next. You can go ahead and pin it or put some little clippies on it. And it's going to be the same thing with our outer fabric. This one you really kind of want to pay a little bit more attention to. You're going to be able to see the bottom of your bag, and you want to make sure that these two seams line up neatly. Take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to back stitch here, stitch it 1/4 inch along, and back tack there. I'm going to do that for all 4 spots, and then I'll be right back. Now I know this video, like any video, because I love to chitter chatter and I like to show you each and every step. Sometimes these videos take a little bit longer than they should. From start to finish, from cutting the fabric to ironing it and stitching it all together and flipping it around and having everything done, I can usually have one of these bags made in less than 45 minutes. Now if I'm making them for the shop or I'm making them as gifts, I'll go ahead and chain piece them. I'll cut them about 5 or 6 of them out at a time, and then I'll go ahead and I'll just chain piece, and I'll stitch down all one side of my lining fabrics, and then I'll flip over and I'll stitch down all 8 of them that way. And you're going to save a lot of time by doing in an assembly fashion. But just doing one at a time and trying to talk through the whole process, it does take us a little bit longer. Sometimes I think with these videos, making the video takes longer than making the project. So I went ahead and I stitched across my gusset. Now if this was a book bag and I was putting in something heavier than yarn, I would go ahead and put a second line through here to make it extra sturdy and durable. And remember, on our lining we left this little hole down here. This is where we're going to turn our bag through. I know it doesn't look very big, and you can make it a little bit larger if you need to. Maybe take your seam ripper and open it more if you have to, or if you forgot to put it in at all, you can always pop out the seam. What we want to do is we want to have both bags right side together. Whether you have your main fabric on the outside or you have your lining fabric on the outside, the only thing you need to worry about is to make sure when you put them together that you're going to have right sides touching, like this. Line your seams up on the sides. I like to go ahead and use the little clover clips. And once again, I like to nest my sides. If I had used batting and stuff like this, I would probably go ahead and split my seam, open my seam. I make sure, as you see, if it's folded down to the right here, I just like to follow it all the way up, just so I don't have a twisted seam. Nobody's going to see it, and I don't even know if you would even notice it, but it makes me feel better knowing I did it right. I don't take shortcuts on everything. Now we are going to go ahead and stitch completely all the way around here. So for me, since this isn't very large, I'll just hold the sides, and then about in the center I'll put a couple more clips, one on each side. I'll put it on the free arm of my machine, and I'll just stitch all the way around like I've done with many of the other bags I've shown you. If you don't have a free arm that you could slide this into the machine, go ahead and lay it down on the bed and then just stitch along here and just move things around. Just make sure you're only going through these 2 layers. Be right back. All stitched around. About a 1/4 inch all the way around. Now what I like to do is, this is my starting spot. I like to start just a few inches past the corner, and then as I'm stitching around, you could use a walking foot if you have one on your machine. When I come back around here, sometimes the lining is just, if you cut it exactly the same size and everything, it works out beautifully, and other times the lining just seems to be too much and you'll have a little bit excess fabric here. What I like to do is, if I have excess, I like to just go ahead and take my side seam and let it just kind of fold into the seam right here, that excess. That way, as I'm going around, you won't see a little fold in my lining in just a strange spot inside here. If it's tucked over here into the seam on the side, it's not noticeable. Right, so put my fingers in the hole in the bottom of my lining. Pull my bag through. I am being strong, but not overly forcing it because I wouldn't want to rip my seams. Okay, I leave a couple fingers in here and I just go through and I make sure that my corners are all pulled out nicely. If you forget to do this, it's really easy to do afterwards also. Let's see how my sides turned out. See? Oh, very, very close, almost perfect. Not even really a noticeable amount that it's off. Not even barely an eighth, less than an eighth. So that worked out really well. Now we have to take this back to the sewing machine. And have to, sometimes if you want, you can go ahead and press this or finger press it. And just like in any of the other bags I've shown you, you're going to go ahead and just do a really 1/8 of an inch top stitch along here, back stitch on both sides to close up this hole. Do it in a matching color. If you have a whole bunch of colors, you probably won't notice it in whatever. I'm just going to stick with the black. And then we have to tuck this inside. You want to take this over to your pressing station. You want to pull your lining down and make sure it's on the inside of your bag. And then I go ahead and I go around and I press this. And I make sure that my outside fabric is rolled down just a little bit. And then that way I can go ahead and do an 1/8 of an inch top stitch all around here to make it beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and close up this hole, get this pressed, do my top stitching, and I'll be right back. And there it is, my nice tall sock bag. When I press this, I like to go ahead and I fold it under as much as I can, and I take my iron and I press from the inside. It just helps it to ease the lining in if you press it this way. If you press it this way, it will work, but sometimes you'll end up having your lining pop out. And this way I know, because my iron is pushing it in this way, it's kind of helping it to stay inside. So my next step will be just to put my snaps in. Go ahead and check out the video on the iCard to show you how to do that. He's nice and tall. It's about 12 inches tall. Now that I'm looking at it, I'm not sure if it's going to actually work for my socks. I think I need my socks to be a little longer. I'm kind of being a little picky about my sock knitting bag. I'm not sure exactly what I want, but this is going to be a great size for my shawls. So let me pop some snaps into this and I'll show you the finished product. I think this would look really great with some light purple snaps, but the only choice I had was either black or white, and I didn't really want the white. I think that would stick out too much. So now I have a new sock and or shawl knitting bag. And you guys have seen my basic process. Do something wrong and go back and fix it, right? So I hope that helped. If you have any extra questions, just let me know down in the comments and I'll do the best I can to get them answered for you. Thank you for hanging out with me this week in my craft room. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and click the little like button and then subscribe if you'd like to see more like this. If you ring the little bell down by the subscribe button, YouTube will let you know the next time I put up a video. I do put up a Talk to Me Tuesday video, which basically just discusses what I've been working on for my projects for the week, and that comes up on Tuesdays. And on Fridays, I do a little Sew With Me project, so if you have anything you'd like to see me stitch up, go ahead and leave it down in the comments, and I'll add it to my list and get to it as soon as I can. I hope you guys are having a great week. Once again, we are still having a rainy day down here in Florida. It's a little bit different today. We've got thunder and lightning going on, but our grass is growing great and everything's nice and green. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.